Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. My name is Verghese. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. Be sure to subscribe to our work over at InsideNebraska.com as well. We have an excellent Cyber Monday deal for you guys that you can hop on and take advantage of right now over at InsideNebraska.com. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We've got a smaller show today, just in preparation for signing day. Just what's left on the board here, as Nebraska kind of races over these next 48 hours or so to just finish up this class and put the finishing touches on what's going to be a pretty small class, but not without some late drama. Not certainly not without some late drama. Obviously the big news of the last of the weekend, save for Nebraska's loss on Friday, was the surprise appearance of four-star safety Devin Jackson, Oregon commit, who committed to the Ducks and over Nebraska, Florida, Miami, a few other programs back in July. Nebraska, of course, had him on an official visit June 20th. Um, they also had him in the spring twice on campus with his teammate and Nebraska four-star cornerback commit Danny Odom. The two were in town together on Friday, and the both actually popped up on at Florida on Saturday. Odom is shut down. There's nothing to really worry about there with Florida and Odom. But with Jackson, he's considering just the last few options, giving Nebraska one last look, gave Florida one last look. The new staff there in Florida with John Summerall announces a new coach is going to make a late push there. But really, the school to watch here, I think it's Nebraska and Oregon, and it's going to take a lot, I think, for Nebraska to pull this off. He's saying all the right things about his Oregon commit. He's let them know and kept them in the loop through this entire process of his plans. But frankly, what's on Nebraska's side here? How can Nebraska pull this off? It's the opportunity to stick together with Danny Odom. Um, Keep playing together. Those two are obviously teammates at First Academy down in Orlando. It's the relationship with Addison Williams, who prioritized them pretty much from the moment Williams took the job. That was one of the first offers that Addison Williams made in the 26 cycle when he joined Nebraska's coaching staff. He went down to First Academy, offered both, or reached out to both those guys and offered them. And has stayed in frequent touch since, and even at points in the spring and even before his commitment, like right before his commitment, I heard from multiple sources on Jackson's end and on Nebraska's end that there was a genuine belief that Jackson's best relationships are in Lincoln, and the third part of this is potential playing time. Oregon has a young, loaded secondary, and he's one of three safety commits in that class. And the Ducks, are obviously loaded and do have a good amount of talent. Jackson, one of those guys they would love to keep in the class, a number five safety in the country. But that said, you look at how Nebraska secondary played on Friday. Look at who's leaving from that room. Sierra Wright's gone. Deshaun Singleton's gone. Nebraska can point and pitch Jackson on, potentially a starting job in the secondary next season. And obviously it's something you'd have to come on campus and earn, but he's fully capable of doing that. Him and Odom both fully capable of competing for a starting spot early in their careers, both fully capable of earning it too, if they play up to their potential. So that's really what's on Nebraska's side here, what they're going to continue to pitch up until signing day. He's put out relatively vague but social media posts that are somewhat cryptic, just kind of hinting that he's still planning to sign with Oregon come Wednesday. But this is a fluid situation we are watching and tracking pretty much up until he signs on Wednesday. So we'll see where he ends up if Nebraska pulls up this late flip, or if he sticks with the Ducks. That's really the big news as Nebraska kind of works to close out here in the 26th cycle with the offensive side of the ball. They've been looking for a third wide receiver spot. Quade Hendricks was a guy that they had checked in on at one point, but he flipped to Minnesota, and Nebraska moved on before even they were planning on hosting him. Decided to cancel that visit, so he decided to flip to Minnesota instead. They're still in the mix for Amari Saab, three-star wide receiver out of Glassboro. That's just a weird, fluid situation. Him and his younger brother Xavier Saab, five-star athlete in the 27 class, have approached their recruitments together. Have tried to, kind of the goal is in mind has been for them to be a package deal, despite being in different classes. Ultimately, here we are, a couple hours from signing day, essentially, and how serious are those two about signing, and how serious are schools about those two? as a package deal. Every school in the country wants a shot at Xavier Saab, the 2027 number one athlete in the country. But are they willing to take Amari, his younger brother, who is a talented player in his own right and has been had a very productive high school career, but is 5'9", right around 160, with a high floor but pretty limited ceiling in terms of what he's going to be capable of doing at the next level. Just what does that look like for a lot of these schools? I think is the question that needs to get answered here over these next 48 hours. Oregon's in the mix and has had him on campus multiple times. That said, he was supposed to be at Oregon earlier this month. He went to Notre Dame with his brother instead. I don't believe Notre Dame is an option for the older Saab. I do believe they are for the younger Saab. Alabama is where their older brother Keon Saab plays safety. Alabama's still in the mix, and closer to home, Rutgers and Syracuse are still in the mix. And so, Nebraska had the brothers on campus one time, November 1st for the USC game. That game obviously didn't go Nebraska's way, but he really enjoyed, both those guys really enjoyed being around the coaching staff. They have family ties to DeHeel Shorts and his family. They're from neighboring towns in New Jersey originally. So there's some ties there that could potentially benefit Nebraska here late. But essentially, the question here for Nebraska is, do you take a third receiver in a guy like Amari Saab, in hopes of potentially landing Xavier in 2027, giving yourself a real shot and putting yourself on the inside track for Xavier Saab in the 27 class? Or do you potentially save that third wide receiver spot for the portal for something else? So that's something I think Nebraska is still working through, still trying to figure out. I think on this end, we're still tracking down, trying to figure out. But that's really the only other offensive name on the board for Nebraska at this time. They were expected to host Mako Metelu, Mount Sac JUCO interior offensive lineman on campus on Sunday. He went to Utah instead. He landed offers from Utah and BYU late. He is a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and those two offers really caught his attention. He made visits to both schools over the last 2 weeks. That recruitment's coming down to Illinois, Wisconsin, BYU, Utah, Nebraska out of the mix there late. So Nebraska's sticking with their three offensive line commits, not expecting them to add a fourth, at least in the high school or JUCO ranks. If they do, it'll be in the portal. Same goes for wide receiver at this point. It's Amari Saab or bust. Running back, they have a running back commit in Jamal Rule. They're waiting a final decision from PWO target Jules Johnson out of Farrell, Pennsylvania. That's a childhood friend of Danny Odom's. Nebraska has an offer out to. They're still waiting on. That's another potential late addition to watch in the cycle. He plays running back at Farrell, but can also play defensive back and a late athlete target to watch. On the defensive side of the ball, they were, hoping to get a shot at Dylan Berriman, the four-star defensive lineman, uh, out of Wichita Paris down in Louisiana. He had a playoff game Friday, so he wasn't able to make his Nebraska visit. And with Lane Kiffin to LSU official, feels like that's where that's trending. He's trying to stay home, trying to stick with the Tigers. That said, I would expect Nebraska to at least have some dialogue and see if they can, sight unseen, potentially pull off a late surprise there. At linebacker, there's really not a whole lot left. Same thing goes for edge, just not a whole lot left for Nebraska. But I will say there's a lot of this late coaching movement. A lot happened yesterday with Auburn getting their head coach, Florida getting their head coach, Lane to LSU, Ole Miss promoting Pete Golding to permanent head coach, and even in between there, Michigan State hiring Pat Fitzgerald. There's going to be a lot of late movement here in the 26 cycle as a result of all this late coaching movement. So there's going to be guys that don't end up signing this week, or either hold off on signing or back off their recruitments altogether and try and make a very late decision that Nebraska can jump on. It's just how aggressive is the staff going to be at this point? They have essentially turned their attention to the portal, which won't open till Jan 2nd. This whole cycle, I've made it known that this was going to be a small class. Nebraska just didn't have the space. They have 91 members of this roster are sophomores or younger. They don't have a whole lot of flexibility to add. And with what needs to happen with this roster as the season has progressed for them to make a sizable jump from this year to next year, the guys capable of doing that are likely coming out of the portal. So why have they, kind of essentially pulled the plug, punted a little bit here at the end of this 26 cycle? That's why. They've essentially turned the attention to the transfer portal, what's available there, trying to find, again, quality members that have played at the college football level, quality starters is the word I'm looking for, out of the portal that have played at a high level in college football that they can add to the roster and improve certain positions. It's hard to find that at the high school ranks, especially here this fall. It's been tough just with how many guys have been committed. Nebraska has been put in unfair positions through this cycle, but that's not an excuse. Losing Tony White and Terrence Knight when they did force them to reset the defensive line board. Having to wait essentially till after the Chiefs Super Bowl run to hire Terry Braden impacted what they could do along the defensive line in terms of addressing that position here this cycle. Looking at the roster and the youth on it and impacted how they built out these boards. They planned on only taking these many guys. And of course, on top of all of that, losing the commitment of Dayton Raiola when they did impacted a lot. I think it's important that Nebraska signs a quarterback every cycle. I think it's important every Power Four team signs a high school quarterback every cycle. It's the one position you can't take enough shots at. It's important you take a shot every cycle. At this point, Nebraska's not going to sign a high school quarterback here in the 26 cycle unless they jump on someone late. Ole Miss's quarterback commit Reese Wise was the guy they were on early. Maybe they make a late run at him with a lot of questions over there at Ole Miss as they work and scramble with the departure of Lane Kiffin to LSU. So that maybe that's a late name they add, but at this point, it's unlikely Nebraska signs a quarterback here in 26, and that's unfortunate, and that's one of those things that will it matter that they didn't add a high school quarterback here in this cycle? Maybe not. It doesn't matter because Trey Taylor is committed in 2027 and happily committed and actively peer recruiting for the Huskers. Maybe not, but it's good to take shots. It's important to take shots, and again, they were not put in a position to do that with holding on to Dayton Raiola's commitment as long as they did, and then losing it as late in the cycle as they did. They just did not. They had not been in communication with quarterbacks through that entire time. They were fully committed to Dayton Raiola the way they thought Dayton Raiola was fully committed to them. And so now we're where we are, where Nebraska's unlikely to sign a quarterback and unlikely to sign a defensive lineman. And beyond quarterback, defensive line, and all of that, I mean, again, I think the next thing is what happens with Emma Johnson. If you lose Emma Johnson to the NFL or the transfer portal, or whatever he chooses to do after this season, if he's not coming back to Nebraska, what is the plan at this point? They have a high school running back commit in Jabal Rule. They think highly of. I think highly of. I think he's better than his ranking. He's actually a back. I think if he adds the weight quick enough, like we talked about last week, he's a guy that is potentially capable of contributing pretty early on in his Nebraska career. That said, though, Nebraska can't rely on potential. They have to land experience back somewhere if Johnson does in fact move on. So that's obviously a bigger discussion we will get into with plenty of people, our own Steve Marek, Zach Carpenter over at InsideNebraska.com and on this channel over this next month as, portal speculation continues to loom over this roster. But for now, we're going to get through signing day on Wednesday. We'll have another show up just to recap signing day, how it goes, and maybe tell some stories on how this class came together up on Wednesday evening or potentially Thursday morning. But besides that, we appreciate you guys tuning in. I know it's not a whole lot of good news this time of year coming out of Friday's loss, but portal is coming. That's kind of where all of this is headed at this point. That's where Nebraska is going to make their big splash additions. That's where I guess the energy is going to come from. So appreciate you guys tuning in. It's been kind of a heck of a cycle to cover, to work through. And I know it's been frustrating for y'all. It has been frustrating at times for me, but appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back later this week